be sure to get all the updates on the inauguration of President-elect Donald J. Trump today, as Ayotunde Balogun and a host of other reporters, Maria Bed, will be filling us in on what exactly is happening in the United States. By the way, have you been following the pre-inauguration party at the Lincoln Memorial? Awesome one. Allowed some people to keep late nights, but we have Babajide Ogunsanwo here. He joins us to look at some other data. Good morning and thanks for joining us. History will be made today in the world as the 45th president comes in, and many are talking about the Nigeria-U.S. relations, especially in terms of trade, and how that will definitely affect business back home, looking at how the dollar has been doing. The Naira has been taking the beating of its life almost on a daily basis. Tell us your finding, your reading of the trade relations between Nigeria and the United States as it is now, and whether we do to see what this may mean with the coming of President Trump.
I think that's a grand way to start it from looking at where we are now. But perhaps before we start from where we are now, we should look at a bit of some history, then we then move into where we are, and then we then look at what are the likely implications for the future. Where we are right now, you mentioned two words, history and trade. And we can't talk about history without looking at what happened prior to Trump. And we can't talk about trade without talking about this notes, the dollar. So I got one for you. In fact, I think I should pass it to you immediately.
Because the last time you gave me, well, how much was that, the Naira that you gave to me?
Because it's been very volatile, it's hard to keep track of it. And so this lets us remember on the same day when Barack Obama came in, January 2009. Now, if you go to the CBN and you had asked them for the value of the Naira, January 2009, what would they have told you? Now, here's the exchange rate that we had 8 years ago, 145.96 kobo. Now, the official rate right now, official, is 305 Naira. Here's what it means. Between 2009 to today, the exchange rate has grown or has risen by over 100%. Now, that's a bit of history. But where are we today regarding what is likely to happen with the dollar and Nigeria-U.S. trade relations? The first is to understand that it's extremely going to be difficult to forecast what exactly Trump's policies will be. He's talked about trying to attract investments into the U.S., improve infrastructure, lower corporate tax rates for businesses. And if he does go with all of that, then it's likely for the dollar to be stronger. So today, in more than a decade, the dollar is the strongest against the yuan. So with the dollar today, you can get 6.8 Chinese yuan. That's the strongest in 10 years. Now the second is, even among other basket of global currencies, the dollar has an advantage of more than 7%. Now all these volatilities are because the market really doesn't know if Trump's policies will be to weaken the dollar or to strengthen the dollar. But there's one clue that we can use to determine what most likely will happen before we move into Nigeria-U.S. trade relations. And let's look at the U.S.-China relations, because the U.S.-China relations will really impact on the U.S.-Nigeria relations, and I'll explain. So for instance, Trump has made very clear statements that the US dollar is too strong, using his words. So the expectation is he wants to attempt to weaken the US dollar relative to the Chinese yuan to be able to stimulate exports from the US into other global economies. But what is the evidence that we have today? The evidence shows that the Chinese economy only imports approximately 7% of its total imports from the US. However, in the United States, most families' expenditure on various items, 12% of their spending goes into items that were imported from China. So in simple terms, here's what it means in Iota. It means that the US needs China more than China needs the US. So clearly, once those facts and evidence are presented,
it's really amazing that that's what it is like.
Yes, that is what it really is, because families in the US depend more on goods imported from China than do families living in China depend on goods imported from US. And the easiest way to look at it is to now clearly see that the evidence and the narrative we have, which is fact today, is that those volumes tilt and the values tilt more in favor of China. That is the position we have today. But Nigerians aren't really so bothered about the dollar-yuan rate. It's more of the naira and the dollar rates. This is what is on the lips of most Nigerians. What will Mr. Trump do? Is he likely to increase the value of the dollar, or is he likely to reduce the value of the dollar?
I think quite a lot that we'll be looking at when we come back, because I think you've raised a very important aspect here. Perhaps that explains why you get to see more Asians or more Chinese going to the United States as tourists, and well, but you have plenty of the goods coming from China to the United States. We'll see how that relates to us, especially in a couple of hours. He'll be taking the oath of office, becoming the 4th or 5th president of the U.S. When we return, we want you to speak to the possibility or give us an idea, a general overlook of what that could mean for business between Nigeria and the United States. That will be when we return. Join us again. It's a closing moment with Babajide Ogunsanwo, China's TV data and info analyst, looking at relations between Nigeria and the United States as the new president comes in the U.S.
Oh, certainly. And then there are two things that are important at the moment, and that's to look at, will we be able to see money flowing from the U.S. to Nigeria? And the second is how much money potentially can now come from the U.S. And one way to look at that is to look at how much, and to look at the trends of capital importation. So what you will find out is, let's look at it from the last 4 years. We've seen a consistent year-on-year decline of capital coming into the country in Nigeria. So we've moved from $21.3 billion 3 years ago to right now only $3.5 billion. Now, that's not the only problem, that capital decline has been high, has been sharply declining. The second problem is looking at how much capital came from the US 2 years ago. 25% of all capital that came into Nigeria came in from the US. Now that is down to only 20%. So in simple terms, it means that it is unlikely that we see a huge inflow of capital coming in from the US, because prior to Trump, even though we had Barack Obama, and he was more of a pro-global policy and more of more liberal when it comes to trade, we had already seen capital importation from the US decline. It simply means with a pro-American and American first policy, which is what the incoming president is preaching, it is unlikely we see more capital or capital growth from the US to Nigeria. But what is also important, however, even though we are saying we're most likely to see perhaps volatile trade inflow from the US into Nigeria, especially when we look at capital, is to see how important is even the Nigeria-U.S. trade relationship as measured by exports. And if we are to look at exports right now, last year, January to September, we exported 700 billion naira worth of goods to the US. In simple terms, that's about 2.5 billion naira every day. The challenge is 93% of that amount is oil. And we understanding that the US is getting more self-sufficient in oil, with new discoveries and also looking at our plans to also diversify our revenue from oil. It simply means we're unlikely to be able to sell as much oil as we had done in history to the U.S. So we need to now clearly, based on the new incoming president, to look at alternative sources.
What really comes to mind here is the inclusion of non-OPEC member like Russia, and of course looking at the relationship that Russia just might be having with the United States now with the coming president. It doesn't really look pretty well for Nigeria in terms of all of these dynamics you've just painted, since the bulk percentage of what goes out of the country is still from oil.
Yes, certainly. And so we look at the recent, last year's OPEC cuts. One of the things OPEC was hoping to do was to ensure that Russia also plays its own part of the bargain by also reducing volume production. So everybody's saying, you know what, as OPEC we can do it, but we need Russia to play its part for this to be effective. However, we know today Russia is closer to Donald Trump than he is closer to OPEC. So we're most likely going to see a potential smooth Russia to US relationship in the short term. But we know Putin could be a very volatile man. And we know Trump could also be very inconsistent. So the days ahead, indeed, for the US, Russia, and US Nigeria relationship is clearly uncertain, because we know that Putin could be uncertain, Trump will be uncertain, and then it simply means that we have to also consider our position in various bilateral and multilateral agreements.
A fine place to rest is Babajide Ogunsanwo. Many thanks for joining us this Friday. Sunrise Daily has come to the anchor point. We'd like to say thank you for being such nice company on the program all through the week. I'm Sulaiman Alede.
I'm Neo Taibo. I want to thank you and encourage you to stay in touch. We will give you an update on the inauguration, blow by blow update, I believe.
Absolutely.
Don't go away. I'm Neo Taibo.